Hey, welcome back. It's a cold night here in New York, the kind that gets into your bones. And I was thinking about cold nights, about empty places humming with quiet energy, and about the moment just before a storm breaks. That moment of perfect, pregnant silence. Imagine that silence, but in a place that's never truly silent. A bustling airport cargo terminal in the dead of night, December 11th, 1978. That's where our story begins. Not with a bang, but with that eerie, stolen quiet. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi, and this is Underworld Kings, the rise and fall from Light Not Studios. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most infamous, botched, and ultimately tragic scores in American criminal history, the Lufthansa Heist. It was a meticulously planned robbery that netted nearly $6 million in cash and jewels. It was also the beginning of the end for the men who pulled it off. This is the story of how the mob robbed a flying bank, and then, consumed by its own greed and paranoia, began to devour itself. So, Kennedy Airport, 1978. The target was the Lufthansa German Airlines cargo building, and it wasn't chosen at random. This was the endpoint for millions in untraceable cash, flowing in from American soldiers and black market dealers in West Germany. The intelligence came from a key player, a man named Louis Werner, a Lufthansa cargo agent drowning in gambling debts. He gave the mob the blueprint, the schedules, the security, the layout. The mastermind was a legend of the underworld, Jimmy Burke, a ruthless associate of the Lucchese crime family. Burke saw this not just as a score, but as the score, the one that would set everyone up for life. He assembled a crew of experienced hands, including the volatile Henry Hill, whose life would later be immortalized in Goodfellas. The plan was a thing of dark beauty. They would strike in the early morning hours, when the vault was fullest and the skeleton crew was at its most vulnerable. And on that freezing night, it worked with terrifying, clockwork precision. Just after 3 in the morning, wearing ski masks and armed with shotguns and pistols, they slipped into the building. They rounded up the employees, forced them to the ground, and with a chilling calm, they got to work. They knew exactly where to go. They disabled the alarms. They used a cargo handler's key to open the reinforced chain link cage protecting the vault. Inside were 40 parcels stuffed with cash and another 40 with jewelry. In under an hour, they loaded it all into a waiting truck. No gunfire, no fingerprints, just a clean, professional job. They vanished into the Queen's night with what would be, in today's money, over $25 million. It was the largest cash robbery in American history at the time. A perfect crime. But here's the thing about a so-called perfect crime, especially one orchestrated by Jimmy Burke. Perfection is a fragile idea. It shatters under the weight of human nature. The first crack appeared almost immediately, the sheer, staggering size of the haul. You see, $6 million in 1978 wasn't just money, it was a gravitational force. It warped loyalties, amplified fears, and turned every whisper into a threat. Jimmy Burke had promised his crew that this was the last score they'd ever need. But Burke was a predator, not a philanthropist. He had no intention of sharing that wealth widely or wisely. The agreed-upon plan was to let the heat die down, to lie low for months before funneling the money out slowly. But the crew, many of them low-level hustlers who'd never seen more than a few thousand at once, started to get antsy. They started to talk. They started to spend. Henry Hill, in a moment of legendary stupidity, began buying fur coats for his wife and fancy cars, drawing immediate, unwanted attention from the police and, more dangerously, from Burke himself. And this is where the story pivots from a heist film into a Shakespearean tragedy. For Jimmy Burke, loose talk wasn't just a nuisance. It was an existential threat. The FBI was swarming. Every member of the crew was a potential weak link, a possible informant who could bring the entire house of cards down on Burke's head. So, he did what a man like him believed was the only logical thing. He began to tie up loose ends. Permanently. What followed was a silent, brutal massacre. One by one, the people connected to the heist began to disappear. The cargo agent, Louis Werner? He got a long prison sentence, but he lived. Many others weren't so lucky. The truck driver, the guy who stored the money, the friends of the crew who might have heard a boastful story, they vanished. They were found months later, in car trunks, in shallow graves, or they were never found at all. The mob's code of omerta, silence, was being enforced with a finality that terrified everyone who knew anything. The $6 million wasn't a treasure. It had become a curse, a poison that was killing everyone it touched. I think about this a lot, about the psychology of that downfall. As an engineer, I'm trained to see systems, how components interact, where the points of failure are. The Lufthansa Heist was a brilliantly engineered system for theft, but the architects completely failed to engineer the human system that came after. They accounted for everything except greed, fear, and paranoia. They built a machine that could only run in perfect conditions, and then introduced the most volatile element imaginable, themselves. Jimmy Burke believed absolute control, enforced through absolute violence, was the solution. But violence isn't a control system, it's a chaos generator. It creates more variables, more fear, more potential informants. It's a positive feedback loop of ruin. In the end, the heist broke the very mob it was supposed to enrich. The relentless FBI pressure, fueled by the notoriety of the case, combined with the internal bloodletting, crippled Burke's crew. Henry Hill, facing a long prison sentence and certain murder, finally broke the code and became a federal informant. His testimony helped convict Jimmy Burke, not for the heist itself, which remains officially unsolved in terms of convictions, but for other crimes. Burke died in prison. Most of the money was never recovered. The legend says it's buried somewhere, or that it was laundered through the mob's channels. But the real legacy of the Lufthansa heist isn't the missing money. It's a masterclass in self-destruction. It shows us that the most complex system you'll ever have to design isn't a robbery or a piece of software or a business. It's the aftermath. It's the human ecosystem that has to live with the consequences of a single, monumental decision. The crew thought they were engineering a windfall. Instead, they accidentally engineered a tomb. They reached for a king's ransom and became underworld kings for a fleeting moment, only to find their kingdom was built on quicksand and the crown was made of thorns. Thanks for listening to this episode of Underworld Kings. If you found this dive into the fatal flaws of a perfect crime compelling, please share the show with a friend. It truly helps us grow. For more deep dives into the stories of ambition, power, and downfall, visit our home at Light Not Studios. That's lightnotstudios.com. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi. Until next time, take care.